So I'm going to start with this very small discussion on firefighters, especially as we're making this little session right in the global north, probably in the most depressing time of the year. I know when I used to work with mental health groups, February was suicide time, and we're obviously in this COVID o'clock as well. So what often happens is that a lot of people find that their more addictive aspects come out. And in internal family systems, and in this session today, we're going to be looking at our firefighters and holding space for our firefighters. And that already comes into something of what would normally be seen maybe even as a bit of a contradiction in terms, because we're normally educated to feel that our firefighters are naughty, shameful, like a shadow part of us, and we don't really investigate what they're about. So today's session, it's a bit like people clapping for the NHS or whatever they do in different countries. It's actually to hold space for your firefighters. And I'm going to explain why we're going to do that. So our firefighters in the internal family systems model, firefighters generally have a role that's about soothing us, okay? So there are very many ways that we might have parts deployed soothing us, and different people, and sometimes we have people who maybe look down on other people because of the way they choose to soothe themselves. Yep, I'm going to send the recording out to anybody who wants it. I'm going to put this on YouTube as well. Not the bit that we do, just the satsang. Okay, so I'm just responding for anybody who's listening to what note somebody wrote. Okay. So our firefighters, we have people, for instance, maybe in the global north who are addicted to going to the gym, who look down on heroin addicts. Okay, and I certainly think there are degrees of severity of firefighters, but they're all actually doing the same thing. They're soothing our system. They're soothing, more importantly, they're soothing exiled parts, which are usually unexcavated, undefrosted, frozen, paralyzed little parts of us that have been stuck from a formative trauma in our younger years. So we have different parts in our systems doing different things. And we usually have manager parts, which are more protective and more dismissive, and might seem more austere, or might come in as removing us from to safety, or making us make certain decisions that don't take us near a wound. And the firefighters have a different role. They're like, let's get out the chocolate, or let's do a lot of work. Some people are workaholics. It soothes them. And this whole COVID thing has been very much about people looking at how they distract themselves. So what's happening is a lot of the safety mechanisms we had in place. Okay, I'm just going to go and work overtime rather than go home and have an argument with my husband, because that's going to remind me of when I was around my domestic violence setting at home, okay, or things like that. So soothing can come in different ways for different people. And you see, this is the thing that has been set up, is we have protector parts that don't really like the way our soothers distract us into doing something, and they bring in the shame. And so in our own system, we have many parts, but some of them could very easily be observed to be managers or protectors, or firefighters, soothers, and they don't like each other. Okay, and this is one of the core things for us to know, which I really wanted to share today, because as things get more difficult, as our safety mechanisms fall away by the waysides, and we realize how we distract ourselves, our managers can kick in the shame, because they really don't want the firefighters around soothing us. They think they're doing a better job by protecting us. Both parts are actually doing something really noble. They're really trying to protect us from the little wounded 3-year-old that's sitting in a corner like this, okay, terrified. But they have a very different opinion about how to go about doing that. And each of them was drafted in a different way. So many of us, as we go through life, we have these hyper-regulated systems, like in a seesaw. So I'm sure you all have something in your life that you've done where you're like, okay, I'm giving up drinking. I'm giving up drinking. And day 3, chocolate comes in, or marijuana or something else, you know? And I'm sure most of you can chart where you did this amazing thing, but what happens is the firefighter just gets deployed in something else, okay? And then the shame kicks in. I'm never going to do this. I'm a bad person. I'm an addict. And this to me is one of these pitfalls of the modern world, is this labeling of people as addicts. And a lot of these systems that say once you're an addict, you're always an addict. And we have people who maybe go to the gym 4 times a day. They're not an addict, but the person using something else is. And personally, I'm into looking at a sovereign approach to addictions, where we can start to understand why in this lifetime we put our hands up for these processes. And when I used to drink a lot, I could see, I knew I was in a process that I was marking to help other people down the line. And I started to notice how if I gave up one thing, I'd just get crazy in something else. So I learned, actually, before I did IFS, because I knew I was in a process and I knew that I wasn't going to be an addict all my life. I knew I was in a journey to learn something. I was able to go, I believe my drinking parts, even before I knew parts, are here for a reason, okay? And that they're doing something in my system. And I started to map, okay, my Irish lineage, some of the traumas I'd had as childhood, the fact that it helped me to be confident going out, and loads of different things. And that it was helping me to really experiment with confidence, loads of settings in life, which have been a real backbone to my practice as a practitioner. And that actually, my own personal journey helped me to realize that to push away the shame about when I'd fall off a wagon or whatever. And I'd started to very occasionally drink, and I'd started to realize that you have bargaining power with the firefighters before I even knew what a firefighter was. So when I did training in IFS, suddenly it was like, wow, yeah, I get this. I so get this. And so the only way, your firefighter can never, ever be fully sent away. And we spent so long trying to banish our firefighters, who actually came in for a good reason. Okay, they came to help us and to look after our exile. Now, what happens as well, if you've got two parts fighting, the little wounded part is never going to get excavated because they're like this around it. Okay. So what we have to do in the training is, it's kind of like diplomacy. We have to go and talk in a separate room, of course, to the firefighter and the manager. Okay. Because the manager's just like, don't even talk to me about that person. But when we say, look, how about, and so I'm giving you a bit of a fast track in this, but how about we see if the firefighter can chill a little bit out? How about that? Wouldn't that be a sign that they're a little bit better than you think? What about we can see about that? And they'll be like, I don't know. I don't believe it until I see it, is often what the managers will say. And we go, well, let's see if we can ask them. And then we go to the firefighter and say, they might be prepared to step down a little bit. If you could just step down a little bit, and a mediation takes place, and you actually can manage to get them both to step down significantly. Now, the protector part can often go. The firefighter still needs to be around in the system, is what Richard Schwartz and others have found. But your firefighter doesn't have any necessary attachment to taking heroin 5 times a day, or ice, or overeating, or whatever. And so it actually often, once it's got a bit of space, actually wants to do something more wholesome. So this is why people can see, oh, well, the gym person, they're getting buff and whatever. It's still a little bit unhealthy when they're doing it too much. But you can actually have healthy firefighters, and you can have like a yoga firefighter, or a disco firefighter, ecstatic dance firefighter. The one thing I need to tell you is, it's not you who's telling the firefighter what they want to do. So the firefighter you know, they know they're distinct beings inside us, the way they come through. So they are like, oh, yeah, I've got one that likes to have a little disco sometimes, and I don't have the little disco as much as I used to, but it's fine because it just knows that we have that, or we put on the music, and it doesn't come up very often, and I don't need the soothing, and I have a lot of other pursuits because now my system isn't distracting itself the same way. And so I don't really have crazy addictions like I did. And of course, I was able to find the parts because I got things to back down that were making me like that. But it wasn't one particular thing. I've mapped about 12 things. And I think it's, you know, we've got so much that we carry for our ancestors that they did. Sometimes it's even an offering to them and a connection to our ancestors. So I really want us to come into this session, which we're now going to go into in a few minutes, in non-duality. And for you to understand that your firefighters are there doing a job, and it's usually not you, but a manager that is the shame part. That's a part, that's not you. And this gives us a whole new lens at looking at the way we are addicted, at the way we soothe ourselves. And when we give our system that space to go, actually, I see what's going on, rather than like, I'm such a failure, you know, it's like, wow. Okay, your system starts to breathe. The exile has space to be seen, and things can unburden that were the reason, part of the reason those things came. And then you don't need the tendency, and the firefighter can be deployed doing something more fun for it. So I really believe that we can come into a new epoch around how we look at addiction, and that we can map our addictive patterns and cycles, and that these things that keep people, now I'm not saying they're not great for some people, but I think that I see some people come in like, I'm a recovering alcoholic, like this, because they've been stuck in believing they've got to be that archetype for the rest of their lives. And everybody's process in upgrading is different. And I think it's been a really useful tool, but I really need people to know that we have other ways of working with things where you don't have to be labeled something that was just how your firefighter was playing out. And I'd already worked that out many, many years ago. And then it was such a relief when I dealt with myself before I did my IFS training. And so I'd gone the slow route, and it was really great to see psychotherapists talking about what I've been through. And I've got other sisters who are IFS practitioners as well, who also had a journey with taking lots of recreational drugs and alcohol. And, you know, we're like, yeah, we luckily mapped it early. Okay. So with that, let's go into our systems in a little minute. Now, for any of you who haven't been on one of these calls before, we are cultivating self-energy, and self-energy is this expanded, it's more like your Buddha nature. It's that part of you that is really expanded. It's compassionate, it's caring, it's got a creative vantage point, it's calm, and it's not addled by the outside world or what just happened, okay? And that's what we often find, especially in these difficult circumstances and times. We can lose sight of that person, that being that we are, because our parts get blended with us, because our wounds that haven't been dealt with are activated. And that's where things like the firefighters can seem to be taking over. And the reason we've been doing these sessions is because sometimes it's hard to cultivate self-energy on your own, especially if you're in Europe or something right now. So I'm lucky, I've just had some chocolate. And I'm also sitting with the sun in a beautiful place in Mexico. So I will be working, and we'll all be working to boost self-energy for ourselves and for our parts and for each other, okay? And it creates a really beautiful vortex. This is a lot of our parts, they need the self-energy of somebody else with us to truly feel ready to back down a little bit or to be released. And so the purpose of today's session is just to hold space for some of our firefighters. And if you find some shameful parts, then knowing that they're parts, and you can ask them to step aside a little bit and to start to maybe map in your system what firefighters or soothers you've got and what's up. And just to really sit with these parts in self-energy, because most of the addictive parts we've had have usually been met with hostility. And so just this essence of this vibration today, I really pray that it just helps your part and your parts in your system to know that actually we do care, because when you do hold space for your parts, amazing things happen. Okay, so, and actually today at the end we'll just do a quick share just of what you found. Okay, so just take a few deep breaths. And taking a few deep breaths to arrive with you and your system. Just marking a demarcation point between the outside world and you, your system.